Good evening, everybody. What a delight to be back. It's been a bloody age, hasn't it? Oh, but we're back. We're live as well. It's been a fair while since we've had a live episode, it feels like. And this is a fun one. We're getting back to Rail Natter basics with some network growth episodes. So for those of you new to Rail Natter, hello. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, when I talk about network growth episodes, we're building a rail network from first principles. Gather round. Let's bloody go. I'm excited. Before we do that, though, a couple of things. Firstly, we did it. Yes, Zach did it. And he didn't just slightly do it. He obliterated his way to an 85% victory. Even if all of the new members who joined the party didn't vote, he would have won with 2/3 of the vote already. So it's not even this is an entryist victory. Literally, the existing incumbent party, which I think I can't because I've been a member for quite a while now. But the membership, no matter which way you cut it, is absolutely behind Zach, which is extremely exciting. And Zach has been milling around. I mean, he started a new podcast. Compete with us on a bloody Wednesday. Zach, I've got my eye on you, by the way. So that's good. Go watch that, Bull Politics. It will be on video form, but it's audio form. It's fine. I expect we'll be popping up on that at some point soon. That'll be fun. But yeah, no, this is good. This is an opportunity for us to be happy. Leadership, Rachel's great. I'm disappointed Annie didn't make the deputy role. Mothin has some proving to do, given some of what came out in the last couple of weeks. But I don't think there's a comparison between Mothin and Adnan. A lot of people have been drawing that comparison. I don't agree with that. Crucify me if you disagree, but I don't. I think there's a clear distinction between the two because Mothin hasn't done an enormous transphobic crash out, whereas Adnan has. Anyway, this is extremely exciting. I just wanted to dwell on it for a minute. Something to be happy about. Hope. Hope is good. We should feel happy. We should feel hope. Talking of happy and hope, Patreon, thank you so much to all the Patreon supporters. Continue to support me to allow episodes like this to happen. You better believe we're going to be talking about what Zach's railway plans are in the bonus episode tonight, by the way. Andy Kay, very good question. Zach is not an MP, no. We have 4 seats in Westminster, Socorro, the Green Party. And we are second in 40 seats across the country. Labour first, Greens second. And close, having gained 30 or 40% in some instances, swing towards Greens. So yeah, there's some fun to be had at the next general election. Anyway, patreon.com/GarethDennis. Support me £5 and above, and you can join the bonus episode later. Without further ado, everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. I did it again. I scrolled instead of pushing forwards. I'm so good at this. It's been a while, hasn't it? Oh dear. Right. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, I should have lined up the gamer horns for Zach. Maybe we should add them in post in the James edit note. Add them in post to the podcast. Anyway, Devon and Cornwall. Oh, what more is there to say than I think is it James Hocking, the original Hocking's ice cream van, sat here. What looks like out on the beach. Possibly at Northam, or maybe over on in Stowe. Anyway, North Devon, a place that I know and love because I'm half from there, so I know this corner of the country very well, particularly North Devon, but I know the southwest overall, the whole peninsula pretty well. And this is part of what it's all about, isn't it? Getting a Hawkins ice cream. Oh, blissful. No, the southwest. What am I talking about? Ooh, crikey. There's some. What's happening here? Come on. There we go. That's a bit better. Let's tidy up my chroma key. No, that's Linton Lymouth. No, the southwest. Oh, it's been 2 weeks off and it's chaos already. The southwest. Where are we at? What's going on? The southwest is. In fact, let me switch my. Yeah. Let's do that and then no, and then let's do that and then I'm trying to get the mouse up. Oh, it's fine. Doesn't matter. Before us, you see Devon, Cornwall, and a little bit of Somerset in the top corner. We'll look into the geography in a little bit more. This part of the country has a fairly sizable population. Was it about 2 million down here? 1.5 million? It's it might not even be that much. It's not a sizable amount of the overall English population or overall UK population, but there are some major city centres. Plymouth is a key core, Exeter another, and Torquay, Torbay, Paignton, that area down there as well. Actually, Exeter and the wider area is a rapidly growing urban centre. And it's not far over the hill to Plymouth. So actually there is a sizable urban population. And you have sort of, as we'll get into it when we look at the population spread, you also have concentrations of population in places like Barnstaple as well, which is a fairly sizable lump when you consider Barnstaple kind of and Bideford kind of as fairly close and popular part. And then likewise when you go down to Falmouth, Truro, and kind of the down that end of the towards the far tip of Cornwall as well. So that what can we say about this part of the country? Well, its geography is interesting. Here is the gorgeous Linton-Lymouth funicular railway. The Cliff Railway is just one of my favourite railways in the country. It's marvellous, water-powered and wonderful, and it kind of represents what a lot of the geography is like. So from a where do you put railways perspective, it's challenging. Let's put it that way. It's geographically challenging, and the consequences of this have manifested in a few ways. Including, firstly, they're slow. They're extremely slow. Like, relatively speaking, the rail network down here is, and let's bring my little face up in the corner. Hello, me. You know what? I'm going to put myself down here. There we are. The rail network it's slow. So this is the speed profile in. So looking at speeds in of the rail infrastructure on Open Railway Map, we zoom in and you can see the higher speeds of the Great Western. There's 125 reaching out to Bristol, and then you can see speeds dropping. You got 100 miles an hour to Exeter, and that's pretty much the end of that. It is that's it. It's pretty slow, and the result of the slow is that it makes rail less of a realistic option. The consequence of this, of the speeds, particularly, you look at the long branch up to Barnstaple, a major centre, and it is, it's an extremely weaving, slow bit of railway line. We'll get onto that in a minute. But you can see overall the rail network, and then you look at the branches, these little population branches, the little branches, Bodmin, for example, and out to Newquay are desperately slow, and they needn't be this speed, and as a result of these speeds they are not competitive with the road network is also not great in this area, but it means that road is either as speedy from point to point without the benefit of the fact that you get from your front door to where you're going versus rail, which is why rail always has to be that little bit, and should be that if at minimum a little bit quicker, if not quite substantially quicker. But it also it's just not driving the right modal shift, and also from a revenue driving perspective, the low speeds mean that you have to run more trains, you have to run more driver diagrams. Slow railways are expensive railways. They're expensive railways to run. The faster the railway, the fewer trains you need to run the timetable, and therefore it's not so much that means fewer staff overall, but it means that you can redistribute the number of staff you're running. You can deploy more drivers to run a more intensive service, or the same number of drivers can run more trains, essentially is the way I would describe that. So as we whiz back to my face, let's look at Barnstaple to Exeter as an example. What is it? It's about 40 miles done in about an hour or over an hour. The result of that being 40 miles an hour is that's very slow. Thameslink is about 50 miles an hour average over its length, and it runs at extremely slow speeds through the centre of London with lots of stops. So the idea, this, and the other thing is, very few of these stations have a decent ridership. Crediton, good. Umberley, pretty good. But lots of the stops are small, little. We'll get onto this particular line and the problems with it. Beautiful bit of railway, the Tarka line, but problems. We'll chat about those in a minute. The result is, if you get the train from Barnstaple to Exeter, for example, it takes an hour and 10 to drive. The train, hour and 2 minutes on the fastest. So it's about the same as driving. But that's Barnstaple to Exeter. If, for example, you're going Barnstaple to Taunton or beyond, then that's where suddenly that slow journey, you lose it because driving takes just over an hour, whereas the train takes over an hour and a half. So suddenly, if you're going in basically most directions from Barnstable towards the rest of the country, rail is a really suddenly very slow option, which is a bit pants, to be honest. There's another issue though, and that is that the network is incomplete. There are fundamental gaps in the network, and that's the fun we're going to be having, isn't it? That is the fun that we're going to be having. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my, you can see my cursor, which you can, marvelous, because that's what we want, because it's time to do some map fun. Before we do that, though, let's briefly go big face to say hello to everyone and see if there's any questions coming through. Autobahn coming in is only as far as Exeter and Plymouth, yeah, quite. The part of the UK that is, saying the part of the UK that is sneakily far away from London, especially Cornwall, yeah, quite. As a person from Massachusetts, all of these names make me think of the towns in Cape Cod. Yeah, this is welcome to all of the names that you'll be familiar with. Yeah, quite. James Bedford saying Trundle, Trundle. Yeah, quite. Speed restrictions west of England line. Yeah, quite. 100 miles an hour is 160 kilometers an hour. Yes, Raphael, that's pretty much spot on. Frequencies are, so in some of those rural branches, a train every 2 hours. Someone might catch me, some of them are even worse than that. But for the most part, I think there aren't any that run much less than that. Hello, JK Outdoors. You're about getting on the Truro to Paddington at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Hello, yeah. £340 return to get to work Summerdew. Crikey. Yes. Charlie Hollow is asking a very good question, which is, has anyone been working on the making these maps more accessible to people? I would love to have more time to do this, and maybe next year, who knows what, I'm in a job uncertainty situation at the end of this year that hopefully won't be quite so uncertain, but might be. And maybe me doing this full time and creating maps and basically fixing transport across Britain becomes my full-time job next year. So yeah, possibly, who knows? More on that later. Anyway, let's get back to it, shall we? So this is the usual fare. So there's the Britain that they have. There's the Southwest. And what's the first thing I'm going to do is show you Devon and Cornwall firstly. So here is Devon. And here is Cornwall. Cornwall's the bit at the end, and Devon is the big chunky bit in the middle. The better part, obviously, as a Devonian. We do our scones properly. Or is that scones? This whole big chunk is most of Exmoor and sort of Somerset. And actually, usefully, I actually went Somerset there. There's the Somerset. So here's Somerset. And we're not actually including that bit in the rest of the part of it because... it's a bit, you'll see what I have included it a little bit into the way the network ties in, but not particularly impressive. You'll see, I'll go through the extra bits and it'll make a bit of sense. Right, so what do we need first? We need some towns, because there are towns in this part of the country. And here they are. So I've excluded all the towns. I have included edge case towns to make the networking make a bit of sense in a minute, but... here are our towns. So let's pop that into reverse order. So the big towns, what do we got? We've got Exeter, we've got Plymouth. Those are the two major 100k plus cities, both in Devon, by the way. Although what's funny is that these are the Unity Authority boundaries, but because of Plymouth being all naval and such, there's this weird boundary missing bit. There's shenanigans and authority boundaries, but it is in Devon. Ignore the Unity Authority boundaries at that point. So, 100k. What about the big towns, though? Well, actually, within the area, the 50 to 100k towns are really just what we have down our kind of Totnes and which one's which? This is where I test my geography. Yeah, sorry. Torbay, and then the one top will be Torquay. So Torquay, Torbay, the kind of that area. So the three big towns all in Devon, or the two cities, one big town all in Devon. We go to 10k to 50k, and you see there is a bit of density. So there's you start seeing the cluster. Actually, in Cornwall, you have quite a spread of these larger towns around Cornwall, which is a real problem for network operations. And on the other side, you have got. So that's Cornwall, a bit of a mat of different sort of medium-sized towns, small to medium towns. You've got the towns around Plymouth, you've got Tavistock, and then you have got the larger cluster that basically is the urban area around Exeter that has to be kind of considered as such. Up here you have what will be it's Tiverton, so it's Tiverton. So there's Exeter, and you've got the cluster here, and then up here you have the other cluster, which is North Devon, which is a pretty populous area, relatively speaking. It's rural but quite densely populated. You have Ilfracombe, you have got Barnstaple, and you've got Bideford and Northam, which is the other bit up there, which is there's Northam. But kind of that becomes the larger Bideford area, Appledore and such up this end. Brass bands and the like. So that is the cluster up there. So that gives you a bit of the idea of the kind of the population spread. And things are, if you remember that our general theme of this is that ideally anything 5,000 and above would be rail connected. You see the challenge when you introduce the 5k and above towns. And what's interesting, so for example, Braunton up here is enormous, actually. It's at the upper end of this. It's nearly a 10k. And by the time you include Croyd and Saunton, actually, it starts tipping into, and Chivener, because this whole area is pretty populated as well. I would suspect that this would tip into this size if you account for the larger, because Braunton is one of the largest villages, technically a village, I believe. It's one of the largest villages in the UK. There's all sorts of weird stats about Braunton, but anyway. Exeter to London has been reduced to 0.5 trains per hour. That's shocking per direction. Absolutely hopeless. Anyway, so, and you've got all these in-between towns. So this is Oakhampton, for example, which is quite well rail served as of recently. You have got... there's the bits and pieces of Cornwall, but mostly Devon. So Cornwall, it's got this patchwork, which is a challenge. But Devon is the real challenge because of the distances between connecting some of these locations up. And as you'll see, actually some of the existing rail infrastructure causes problems, as does, of course, the geography. Why do I want to talk a bit more about geography? Well, this is a flat map. Before I get too excited, what I want to do is just go down here and remind us what... have a little look at the old geography in the middle of this peninsula, because... Let's just zoom in and have a look at what this all looks like. This is a nightmare fuel of patchwork of up and down. There's almost no nice flat surface. It is an incredibly lumpy, bumpy bit of the country. Whether you're at the coast, whether you're dodging the various extremely valuable bits of habitat on the coast or inland, Exmoor, Dartmoor, and others. You look at North Devon, I know very, very, very well, is just Postman Pat land. It's just extremely bumpy, which for building railways is extremely challenging. This is hard, and the whole bloody peninsula is like this. There are very few parts of the southwest of Devon and Cornwall that aren't just like that. There are some flatter areas further down, but even you go down here, you can see that. There's this. It's just all. It's all like this. You see where the motorway is cut through. You can see the motorway has to carve its way up through the hills to remotely make any sense from a. That's the M5 and the A30 later. It's just it's geographically extremely difficult, but it's also geographically got populations, and therefore it needs mobility. And again, we're looking at this from a passenger perspective. If you overlaid goods needs, of which there are quite a lot in the southwest, mining and stone quarrying are a couple of key examples, and some important ports, that would overlay this. But we're focusing on mobility of humans for this exercise. So let's crack on with our exercise, because those of you who know what's coming know what's coming. You know what we're about to do. So let's get rid of the boundaries for now, and let us draw our 100k plus connectors. So this, what we're doing. Oh, in fact, before we do this, before we do this, you know what? No, we are going to do it in this order. So these are our 100k connectors. We're going to show where the existing railway network is later, but I want to look at what the ideal rail network would look like. So, and the way this kind of works is that the split of these, for those who aren't familiar, the split of the different sort of networks that we grow here, these, by the way, are connecting up to the other major centres. I haven't drawn them because they're outside of our study area, but I've decided to include boundary conditions, if you like, whereas I didn't for Wales and Scotland. This time we are going to do that. So the key ones are, coming in from, the kind of the direct London route, and then the Bristol route kind of coming in. And you have, so that's Bournemouth, I think, it's connecting into there, and then Bristol, and then Exeter to Plymouth. So that's the 100k connectors. So then if we look at the 50K to 100K connectors, you can see that we have, actually there's one missing there, isn't there? Let's draw this one in, because we should have this one here going from here to here. That's also connected there. So we've got the connector there kind of going between those ones. You can see there's not much extra, because all you're doing is adding in. So basically what you're looking at is, if we're talking about the complete network, then you don't need that bit. You connect from here to here. Ideally, for your ideal rail network, you'd go from there to there to there, and that would provide you one main trunk route that would do everything you need to do. Except the geography is, as we'll see, a challenge to that. Okay, so let's then go for the 10K to 50K network. So this then includes, basically what we're doing is connecting up the towns that are the smaller towns, not the smallest here, but the smaller towns, and seeing what the network looks like. And you see we get this patchwork. There isn't an obvious emerging route, a core route. I mean, I can take that back, actually. There is an obvious single route, the spine, as you were, you kind of are going to put this way, which is not far off, as you'll see where the current spine is, although it's imperfect. But how you deal with the fact that there is the North Devon population is an obvious challenge in joining that up. That's the fact that it's up and out, and how do you tie that into it? What's the best way to do it? Because are you just assuming that everyone's going into the core of the country and therefore you point it in this direction, or are you going straight down, straight to the rest of the network, the quickest route to the core, and therefore heading straight down to Plymouth might be an option that you would take. So it's not. We're losing the clarity of what would that network look like, and then of course this only continues when we go to the kind of the final overall network, is that you see all of a sudden that yes, there is still a generally obvious route for the higher density core, but it isn't, we have quite a patchwork across the southwest, which patchworks on a national scale are good, but on a regional scale are quite challenging, because you cannot have railways running left, right, and all over the place. What you can do, of course, is that each of these connectors should be represented by a bus route. Absolutely, certainly. But what do we do about the rail network? What do we do about how this matches the rail network? So if you imagine you've got these connectors, and then you've got kind of the thicker lines that are where you'd have. So basically, the analogy for this is you want to have where you've got sufficient population and the core spine. You want the decent infrastructure, the double track electrified railway, with 100 mile an hour plus speeds, connecting into the rest of the kind of the core. And then the rest of it, you'd then have a lower quality, 100 kilometers an hour perhaps, or maybe higher, 75, 80 miles an hour, ideally 90 perhaps, or maybe even 100 where you can, to get the rest of the network to pull it in. But you can see there is not a clear way to join up these other population centres. It's a challenge. Bude over here is a particular challenge, because it's absolutely miles from anywhere else. And so sensibly linking it into any potential project, rather than it having its own dedicated single line up to a 5,000 population town, it's difficult to just it's when I'm saying difficult to justify, I'm not talking in kind of neoliberal, we can't afford it, the business case doesn't stack up. It's more the carbon cost and the environmental impact of driving a railway to that town doesn't justify the population that's there. There are better ways to service that population, given that you also have to think about the fact there are also lots of little places that might not be 5,000 and above, so aren't on my map, but absolutely merit being connected into the public transport network, which is where buses are useful. And the challenge with rural areas like this, just like with mid-Wales, as we've talked about with the Aberystwyth Carmarthen debate, is that often you end up with a kind of a braided connection, not a single we can join the dots neatly between these towns, but actually you often have different towns braided apart from each other and having express routes that alternately go between them, where there's a big fan, and then they mesh in and give you the higher frequencies as you get close to the urban core, is a better way to service those populations than building a single railway that would exclude, by its very nature, some of those smaller locations. So our network isn't so clear down here, and that's before we start talking about geography. So having done that, having got that up, what about the existing railway? Before I do that, I'll just briefly go big face to see if there's any questions. So are your population threshold numbers UK specific? If you take the same numbers elsewhere, I'd take the same numbers in any built-up area. 5,000 and above is a pretty concentrated group of humans. 100,000 above is a very concentrated group of humans. And then when you get to like the numbers above 100,000, we've kind of done it. That's episode 222, is where you start getting into the 500,000 to 400,000 to 600 to 800 to 1 million plus, is where you start needing to think about much more strategic infrastructure. And how it relates to this, of course, is very important, and we'll get to that. We will touch on that. But first, let us get rid of my stupid face and continue with our adventures. Is everyone following? Anyone who's new here, is everyone kind of following this? Hello to everyone. First, Rail Net Alive from me. Hello, Max Benship. Lovely to have you along. There'll be no railways in Devon and Cornwall now if the government had gone with the extremes of the Sherpa report. Well, yes, quite. So, the next thing we're going to do is have a look at the existing railway network. So, let us display the existing railway network to understand what that looks like. And the big, thick, dark line is the mainline railway running down. And yes, technically the main line continues on, but really it thins out much beyond. Frequencies and such do drop a bit once you get beyond Plymouth. So you can see here is, let's get rid of our connectors, actually, because I think that might make life a little bit easier and a little bit clearer. So let's get rid of our connectors to see what the obvious gaps are. And this is where I might... So you can see as we come down, tell you what would be useful is for me to just add a little overlay here of some white circles to pick out some of the larger places that are not connected onto the existing railway network. So you can see down in Cornwall that actually there's not a bad job done of still having connectivity into most of those, even the 5,000ers, if you like, with one exception being Wadebridge here, very much a missing link, and that missing link also included, which I think, this is Bodmin, isn't it? Is it? No, that's a circle. I want the world behind. Yeah, Bodmin. So Bodmin has a parkway station, and it has an old railway that runs through, but it's not on the mainline railway network. There's an opportunity there. So that's so in terms of Cornwall, you've got. What's this down here? That'll be St Ives. Actually, I don't need to say what it is because I deliberately let this down. Yeah, you've got St Ives here. You've got Bodmin as larger towns not on the network. And then basically you get into Devon where all the challenges are. So Tavistock is a key one, regularly talked about, major town with a decent bit of variety. In fact, 2 railways that used to connect it up. Connecting it, sorry, we'll get to how you connect it in a minute, but Tavistock is an obvious omission. I would say that Brixham, at the bottom end of kind of the Torbay conurbation, is a gap, is a missing link that should have a full railway connection. It shouldn't peter out where it does. It should continue, steal the Heritage Railway back, etc. Sidmouth, very obvious gap is Sidmouth. Huge, big old town. Close to Exeter with no railway connection. That's rubbish. Tiverton is an obvious one. You've got Tiverton Parkway. In fact, let's put up some pink dots, which are the railway stations. So that'll help a bit. This also might have Heritage Railway stations on it, so don't get too excited about where they are. Tiverton Parkway is up here. There's Tiverton Parkway. It's kind of a weird. I'm not a huge fan of parkway stations, but it is a parkway station, and it's used pretty heavily, to be honest. But it's miles from Tiverton, and Tiverton itself, therefore, isn't on the mainline network. And you would say, well, there's that's an obvious gap there. It's a problem. It's rubbish. What's going on there? And then we look at the connection up to North Devon. Firstly, we see that Barnstable, big old Barnstable, has a station. It's serviced. It's got a fairly cute little old station that I wouldn't say matches the scale of the town here. Again, Barnstable is here, but there's a lot of Barnstable not included in, there's a lot of Barnstable that continues out this way. By the time you get around to, Instow even, and basically pretty much around the coast, you're almost into Bideford at that point and Easter Water. Not to mention Barnstable stretching out along the Link Road and so on, growing. It's a large, busy area. But unfortunately, because of varying railway politics, the bit of railway that was retained was not the fast connection that we'll look at the alignment of momentarily, that the Link Road has pretty much bulldozed in its entirety, but it was the slow weaving GWR route, not the Southern Railway route, that was retained. So you have this very slow weaving, Heritage Railway type situation going on to get you down to Exeter. It's remarkable that it only takes an hour, given how slow it is, but also it takes an hour, and it shouldn't. It really shouldn't. So you can see that is... There is some logic to that being the retained route, because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have had the direct Exeter connection, and it does make sense to connect Exeter and Barnstable. we'll get to this. What I would say is that Bideford is an obvious gap. Ilfracombe, big town, obvious gap. Ilfracombe and also not included there, but Cummartin's just around the corner, and so again, there's quite a sizable bit of population. Woolacombe as well, not far off. It's a very populated bit of corner of the country here, despite being also quite rural. So you start seeing that we've got these gaps. The Devon rail network has some big gaps. And if you then go back to bringing up our little series of nodes and connectors, and we'll maybe hide this one and just bring these two up, because I think that's probably the most useful one. Major growth happening east of Exeter as well as around Plymouth and Taunton, all without much rail connectivity. Nucker, absolutely agree with that, yep. Raphael, there's no such thing as a light railway, but trams aren't in here. We're just looking at, the populations I'm talking about merit a fixed permanent connection, railway connection. I would say that these are rural and semi-rural and urban, and other than Exeter and Plymouth, you're looking at conventional kind of rural and regional railway services. Within Exeter and Plymouth, you might be looking at more of a diversity of provision because of the scale. Likewise, in North Devon, you might think about doing something different to service the area, but I am not convinced that I think they're... We'll talk about this. I'm going to do a dedicated North Devon episode because I think there's plenty to talk about. It'd be fun to look at actual proposals about what you would do and how you could make it work. But we are going to look at each of these in turn, and what do we do about each of these? And this is where I've come up with, what do you need to do to join up all these gaps? What are the projects that you need? Accepting, by the way, of course, that there is... Episode 222 gave us our high-speed route coming in from London along the south coast, coming through Exeter and round to Plymouth. So the reason I highlighted this is it's a key assumption of... A lot of people talk about the northern route. I've worked on... years ago, worked on understanding what the alignment would look like and what you could get out of this route in terms of journey times. And... for the sake of argument, I'm assuming that the right thing being done is building the high-speed connector that goes Plymouth-Exeter and onwards and gives us our full railway route. Bearing in mind also that I have the high-speed line coming into Bristol, but I leave fairly... at this point, from episode 222 baseline, I consider there to be a gap in the dedicated brand new high-speed infrastructure between Bristol and Exeter, because I wasn't convinced that you needed to have the additional high-speed capacity. But there's some stuff to build on that. I'm going to start from the tip, right? St Ives. Oh, what would probably be a useful thing to bring up is a whole massive pile of unsorted X-railway lines that you can just about see as quite faint lines here. I've deliberately kept them quite faint, but you can just about see those. I think if you're on mobile, it might be a bit trickier, but if you're on your if you're on watching this on your big TV, you should be able to see it nice and clearly. So, St Ives. It's connected-ish by bits of heritage. There's some retained heritage railway, but not much. There is a route that went down, but the route's not great. So, if we were planning if I did my braided alignments process, I wouldn't be. There'd be elements that might find itself sat on the former railway line, but not all of it would be. Not least because the connection at St Ives connects in a weird location. I would say that it would make more sense to connect in facing the other direction and kind of join yourself up to the sort of this is Camborne and then this will be Redruth, but into the kind of the Camborne Redruth kind of built up area. So to connect St Ives, one of the things you could do, and this is where the network challenge comes in, is if you have all these little branches, what's the best way to service them? Do you have a shuttle that runs back and forth, which is the case for a few of these? You've got these little Cornish shuttles. Those have the advantage of those is that they're fairly self-contained, so you can just run them and that's fine. But but there are also benefits to some of these larger towns. There might be benefits of actually providing an alternative. So, London services or Bristol services, some of them would kind of come down here and round, and some of them might come down here and round. So that's one thing you could do. But again, geography is a challenge. This is such busy and, extremely nature valuable land that's difficult to... Easier on this side, actually. This is flatter, this bit of coastline, actually. So you could definitely do more on this side. So I think actually a shuttle out and back to St Ives ends up being probably the right thing to do on balance. Of course, this is me doing very quick analysis on my gut feeling of understanding the terrain, understanding the populations, and a feel of what the right thing to do is. People are saying that's Helston, not St Ives. You're right, it's Helston. Thank you for catching me. Helston. Thank you. So connecting in, yes, St Ives is a bit further up in it, right? So managing to connect up. This is our lovely little Penzance down here, by the way. This is the far end of the network, the far tip of the railway network. So actually getting Helston connected through into the rest of the network, I think the right thing is to have a branch. Yes, St Ives is like the constituency. So let's get our data up. People wonder why I've said St Ives, including me. It's the constituency of St Ives, but the actual town is Helston. Yeah, there we are. So. Is St Ives this bit? That might be St Ives there. So that's how I think. So project number 1, if you like, is this. St Ives is the one with the branch just north of Penzance. Oh. Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Thanks, everyone. I'm an idiot. Thank you. Just having my data layers puzzling and confusing me. Thanks, Ailey. Very helpful. Yes, it's nice as a position on the north coast. Yeah, sorry, Helston. Helston is so it's Helston's the connection. Project number 1, Helston. Get Helston on the rail network. Then we go to project number 2. Bodmin has its Parkway station, but again, I was thinking, like, do you bring Bodmin up? There are 2 ways to service Bodmin better. One of them is to somehow get an extremely weavy. We'll come to the existing network and where I think there are challenges, because I think we should be cutting a lot of these corners and improving the alignment. We don't need a lot of this corner cutting is to make sure that the gradients aren't too horrific, but you don't need the gradients to be. You don't need to worry so much about the gradients if you've electrified the whole thing. You can start making the railway steeper, which means you can cut the corners out. You can cut out some of those corners so you can get the journey times. You can get the length of the railway, the speeds up, and therefore journey times down. So you don't need to contour as much if you have Italian projects. So if anyone doesn't know, so huge number of Italian projects in terrain much more aggressive than this to improve the quality of their railway network, and a lot of it was building long tunnels just inside the cliffs along the coast. I don't think we need to do that level, but there's a lot of civil engineering we could be doing to cut some of these tight corners. And the good thing about them is they can be fairly self-contained little projects. You don't have to have an enormous route thing. You can just have it as a program of works that is, you pick the most egregious drops in speed, and then you work around this. If we get Open Railway map up, you can see exactly what I mean. If you zoom in, you can start seeing where some of these. You can see it's like 65, 65. You start seeing like, this is all 65. But which of these curves could you start bumping those speeds upwards on by chopping and by cutting here and by widening here and by doing a little bit more there and a little bit more here, and actually bring that up to 75 or bring it up to 90 or even getting much more of it up to 100. Those opportunities exist, but I've not considered those as the projects, so that's fine. Bodmin, one of the things you could do is basically build a new alignment that somehow gets through Bodmin and connects back, but that does extend the main line out quite a bit. And so I think, and also you've got the opportunity here to go up and service, what is it, Wadebridge? Maybe actually building a connection from Bodmin Parkway and building it through is the right thing to do to connect to the coast up there. Ian asked an interesting question, which is what the impact on speeds is from electrifying. So it's not so much about top speed electrification, but electrification gets your speeds up by improving acceleration. Ian, I'm not suggesting you're implying otherwise. But yeah, by the acceleration improvements, you can make quite tremendous improvements in journey time. So, you can have even up to 15-20% improvement in journey time in some instances. So, trying to think of the analysis I did over the Borders Railway, we were talking about the completion of the Borders Railway and the analysis I did on that. It was in the order of 10-15%, I think. Yeah. In terms of journey time improvement. Yeah, so again, it depends. And the other thing, of course, is that you improve the timetable, the capacity, because services of different types can run more closely together when they're electric because the performance is a bit closer. So your performance of your little rattly Sprinter versus your freight train versus your IET is quite dramatically different, whereas when they're all electrified, the performance is quite similar between them, even the freight. But certainly you can fit the others much more closely together, which means you get more capacity out of the line as well. Electrification basically down to Penzance is a no-brainer because you get rid of a load of pointless diesel engines. So, project 2, Bodmin to Weybridge, I think is a sensible enough project, connecting up to the coast, and that provides you some connection into all these towns that are around here. You can then provide bus connectivity into a hub at Weybridge and bring down into Bodmin, and also potentially you could have it that you could terminate services up in Weybridge, so you could run some services that run through into Bodmin and don't have to go all the way down to Penzance. So you provide yourself some alternative options for where trains run, timetable wise, into the longer distance regional services as well. People might know that my view is that London trains maybe don't need to run all the way down here, and that you should have more frequent regional services that aren't quite so dependent on London disruption, just running them happily around here into the hubs at Plymouth and Exeter. But it's not a hill I'll die on, but I kind of, my gut feeling is that it's a better thing to just have a much higher frequency regional network than just relying on all the IETs trundling down from London. Although you might start some direct services here and there. But anyway, right, so there's that. So that's project number 2. Project number 3, Tavistock. There's a lot of rail infrastructure that still exists in the direction of Tavistock. Up to, what is it? Beer Alston is here, isn't it? Let me just remind myself. Is that Beer Alston? Beer Alston, let's have a look. Let's see. It is... Gunnis Lake. I think Beer Alston might be further down. Gunnis Lake. Yeah, okay, fine. You can connect to Tavistock, has a few different rail options. And a part of it depends on, again, when I look at the overall big picture, if we were building this all as I think we ought to, I wouldn't necessarily join the dots between Oakhampton and Tavistock. Thing is, by the time you got up to Tavistock and down, okay, this is very sensitive and challenging. There are advantages to having this as a freight route that isn't running on your, a resilient freight route that isn't running on your high-speed network, but also isn't relying on surviving the coast down here. So there are merits. If you start looking at the freight picture, I suspect there would be merits of then thinking about completing the northern route. But if you then think, well, what's a quicker way to provide resilience before the high-speed route arrives here in the 2050s or whatever, actually then maybe you definitely say, yes, you complete between those two. But for now, for the sake of this network, I'm saying Tavistock connectivity is a key project. So project number 3, getting Tavistock tied into Plymouth, and doing so in a way that doesn't point the wrong direction, because the rail network's very weird around here because of height changes and all sorts of things. The railways point, you want to avoid reversing trains en route. So ideally, you want to make sure that you're pointing the train the right direction to do the right thing. So, for example, if you're thinking about connecting Tavistock to, as part of the northern route, it's already stupid that to have the northern route, you have to reverse at Exeter, then come back out again. That's already irritating. I think ideally you wouldn't be doing that, which is partly why for passengers I'm not so convinced by having as the long-term solution being long-term through running through there. I think a medium-term solution that may be sensible if you're building it for freight anyway. But the same story coming through from Tavistock, I'd say that you kind of want to be coming through the existing railway faces the wrong way. It brings you up into Plymouth and you have to reverse back out if you're running long-distance journeys over that side rather than along the coast, which you need to pull trains away from the coast, not just for resilience, but because this is becoming an increasingly busy suburban route. And it needs to be run as such. Like, it needs to be frequent suburban services running to Exeter, not mixed, all the mixed traffic running along there. Ideally, you want to segregate that out as a almost dedicated suburban route. So, our next project then. So we've got number 1, down to Helston. Number 2, Bodmin to Weybridge. Number 3, Tavistock. Number 4 is Brixham. Is extending the railway that runs down here, stealing the Heritage Railway, mucking around with the mess of railway around down here, and getting the railway to run down to Brixham, to have the station, the railway run and service Brixham. So nominally straightforward, probably like a sort of a leave and link scale of work there. So not a particularly big project, but I think a necessary one. I think a sensible one, and also useful for freight, as I think others are pointing out. So, yeah, other people are saying new route following the A38. Yeah, this is it. Like, if you're going to run... Yeah, I've got an alignment already through here that cuts a lot of the curves and improves the speeds a lot. I've got a 100-mile-an-hour alignment that I would propose if you were going to do the northern route, is what I think you would do. Anyway, more on that another episode. If you want that one, that could be a bonus, or we could do it as a full episode at some point. You shout at me. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Project number 5, though, is how to get Sidmouth onto the network. And this is a bit of a tricky one, because like, well, what are we doing here? given the scale of population growth, it doesn't feel like a crazy idea to build up the connection of the network from. So what have we got here? We've got Honiton. Oh yeah, crikey! We've got Honiton. Connecting Honiton through to Sidmouth via Exmouth and round is maybe not a bad way to do it. So actually building this as an alternative loop, because then also you potentially can you might run some services that come this way round into Exeter rather than the other way. Longer distance services gives you some options. Alice Alexander is saying old alignment completely gone in Brixton, so difficult to get a station into that town. Yeah, one of the fun things will be going back through each of these projects in a bit, each of these in a bit more detail, working out how the hell you do it is almost a project. An episode in of itself, and why the hell not? Because I love the Southwest. It's fun hanging out down here. So yeah, again, this is what looking at population. This is what should be there, and it's not. Well, it's difficult. It's costly. It's like, well, yes, it is, but the population's there. And if we want people to continue living there in this century, then we need to provide them a rail link. Bus doesn't cut it. The reason we use these populations is that, okay, for the 5,000s, the 5 to 10, if it's not flanked by larger towns on their own, they don't necessarily merit the rail link, but they're useful because they help divert the rail link. If you're putting a rail link near one, you divert the link through it. But the 10 to 50k absolutely merits a permanent rail connection, a heavy rail link. So that's the next project. And then things get fun and messy. By the way, one of the projects I've kind of in my number 10 list of 10 projects is absolutely the high-speed, episode 222 high-speed line through there. So I'm not going to dwell on it because that certainly is one. But similar theme to that is what you do about Tiverton. Now, Tiverton Parkway. So what's also daft is that, like, you've got the railway running through Cullompton and doesn't have a station there, which is also daft. Like that to me seems completely barking mad. But in there not being a station there, perhaps the right thing to do is actually build a new alignment that goes as best as you. And there's space. The northern end of Tiverton, there's space to make this work. Southern end is much more challenging. Is put the railway through Tiverton. Actually, put the main line through Tiverton. So you put the mainline railway through Tiverton. You divert the southwestern main line, kind of the South Devon main line. Is that what it is at this point? I don't know what technically it's called at this bit. Anyway, basically it's like the Bristol and Exeter railway. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. The GWR trains running here, the main line running down here, the Great Western Main Line, as it still sort of is. You divert off it, abandon it, send it through Tiverton and down, and build a station accordingly, and probably build a parkway outside of Tiverton on the other side to replace the old Tiverton Parkway, essentially. So you can do that. You might decide that you can retain the existing Tiverton Parkway and bring the alignment up through there without it being a problem. So you might actually end up keeping it and then coming down this side. Options for that. You might, in doing so, you might then also think about what you do with the engineering down here, because Cowley Bridge is a nightmare. It's a drainage nightmare. It's an engineering nightmare. I think that there are things, and also you can think about the configuration of this. If you are intending to then run stuff through running trains that don't want to reverse, it allows you to maybe think more cleverly about what you do with the rail connections up this end as well. So that becomes quite an interesting proposition. And in bringing the main line up to Tiverton, that changes the equation I talked about earlier about the connection from North Devon down to the rest of the railway network, because at the moment it makes some sense to go, very large scare quotes here, down to Exeter directly from Barnstaple. But if you've put the main line through Tiverton, then all of a sudden, by the way, this line here that I've just highlighted is the Southern Railway fast route through to Barnstaple, a pretty wonderful alignment that, as you can see, just got obliterated by the bloody link road. The fetid A361 getting rid of my wonderful railway alignment and putting its own bridge deck on top of the lovely railway piers in some instances on one of the viaducts. Anyway, very frustrating. But so that's gone. You're not reusing that track bed. But what you can think about is some of this is maybe where you can do. Maybe you do that in a few places, because there's a few areas that are pretty easy to put a railway along still, even with all the weird 3-lane stuff they've been doing recently on the link road. What you do then to connect North Devon to the rest of the network, potentially you start thinking about, do you abandon the Tarka line, or maybe it becomes a heritage line but self-contained if it can survive, but it doesn't become the mainline route. You have the route that goes through Crediton and to Oakhampton just becomes a single branch that goes Crediton, Oakhampton, and you abandon the existing alignment, some or all of it, and actually send the trains directly from Barnstaple to Tiverton. We'll get to what's going on in North Devon in a minute, but in terms of a new connection that would be much faster, because then if you've got the good quality connection down from, if you've rerouted the main line from Tiverton to Exeter, via Exeter, Tiverton, Bristol via Exeter, no, Bristol, Exeter via Tiverton, then you get your good journey times you beat the journey times as they are now down to Exeter anyway, so you kind of solve that problem. The population centres, there aren't any along the existing route, and it's very slow and very beautiful. And so cutting corners here would be extremely environmentally damaging. It might be something to consider, but it'd be very, very damaging. Building something new is quite probably a better way to do that if you're going to do it. I think there's some interesting things to explore there as that bit of a picture. But I think this is really good example of the rail network being a proper mess here. Like what was built in the first place wasn't very good. The cost cutting by the time you got down to this corner of the network. What was kept and what was got rid of wasn't maybe right. It didn't make much sense. If we kept the existing Southern Railway route, it would have given us some, if not a complete better picture, but certainly a marginally better picture to deal with in terms of that link to North Devon. Then we get to North Devon itself. Now, connecting around to Bideford, reasonably straightforward. You have a connect. Let's switch off our town, so we've got a bit more clarity. Pretty easily, okay. You have to demolish the weird slate baskets. But pretty straightforward for you to continue the railway and extend it back and rejoin up to the line to Bideford. The alignment here is pretty good. So getting down to Bideford, okay, Instow is a bit challenging. You might decide to go inland because of how it is now, but a lot of it's there. You could make it work. I reckon you could make it work. Level crossing at Instow would be a challenge, but not insurmountable, certainly. And then you come down to Easter Water, and yes, it's the wrong side of Bideford. I think given that the population's all on the other side, you start thinking, actually, is it better to do something different to maybe bring the railway up and cross alongside the link road and come up? There are different things to think about how you best service this population. Because Easter Water's a bit useless on that front. There's a tiny, narrow old bridge. Traffic's rubbish on this side of Bideford. And you're avoiding a lot of the new population that's popping up. Lots of new housing popping up on this side of Bideford that just would remain unserviced. But Bideford connection is key. How you do that, I think down to Instow is quite straightforward, but beyond that is a different question. The other project then, our last project on our list, before we jump into a little bit of news, is northwards, of course, is getting up from Barnstaple through, past Chivener, Bronton, Knoll, Ilfracombe. And again, it's tricky because the existing railway is bonkers between Bronton and Ilfracombe. Quite a lot of it's a bit missing. I know Stonybridge very well because that's at the end of, without doxing my RIP to my granddad who died yesterday. It's funny that I was planning to do this and then news that my dear grandfather has died. My connection to North Devon thinning by the year. But anyway, the railway's pants up to Ilfracombe. RIP's to Fred in the chat, by the way. Anyway, so the railway climbs up an enormous, hilarious hill, and then drops down past reservoirs into a very strange bit of Ilfracombe that's way up the side of the hill and difficult to access. The trouble is, every other way into Ilfracombe is also a nightmare because the A361's on the top of the hill and then it drops down to the bottom of the hill, and there is no other way to get a railway in there. It's very difficult. Doesn't mean that people shouldn't try though. Whether you do something on the existing railway, it's so far out of town, or whether you rely on the main line, the main road, and get yourself into town somehow. it's very challenging. Ilfracombe is challenging, right? Ilfracombe is very challenging. So I think any project like this should be staged, because good grief, if you got a railway to Braunton, it would solve a lot of problems, because the traffic in and around Braunton is a hellscape. How would you connect to Braunton? You would not cross the river in Barnstaple, no. You would rely on the extension towards Bideford, and I think what you do is you run the railway through, and the power station sadly is in the wrong place. It's too wide there. But bearing in mind this whole coast is very hyper protected, and rightly so, because it's extremely habitat rich. So a lot of sensitivity required. But what I would say is you would bridge this and bulldoze through Chivener, because no one needs Chivener anymore. It's a dead airport. It's done. And then rejoin as you head into Braunton and do what you need to do through Braunton. But that means that you don't have to worry about the coastal bit along here. It stays as lovely cycle path, fine. Oh, likewise, by the way, the Tarka Trail here, which is marvellous, absolutely should be retained. But there it is. So if I get rid of a few things to tidy this up a bit, so that you can see a bit more clearly what I'm talking about, and also, yeah, let's leave the existing bits, the kind of the former railways there as well. So what are we doing? We've got the connection, the Helston connection, Project 1. Project 2, Bodmin through to Weybridge. Project 3, Tavistock, bringing it on to the mainline network. Those are all proposed as branches at this point from a passenger perspective, acknowledging what we've said about the Tavistock Northern Route connection. Brixham connection, as discussed, looking at the geography here, not easy, because everything has been completely built on. It doesn't mean you don't do it, though. Whether you bring the railway around the top here, or whether you bring it around the other side, there are options, there are things you can and should do. Building a station here and then building a load of houses around it, an option as well. So there are things you could do for lovely Brixham, a lovely marina down there. Sidmouth proposed a fairly substantial project here because of, I think, of the potential for continued growth of housing and people living down in this corner. There are alternatives, what you could do. You could look at different ways to do it. But I think just a sticky out branch isn't the right thing to do for Sidmouth, given the populations along the coast here that you could be joining up with rail. Project number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is diverting the main line via Tiverton. Project number 6, Tasty. Project number 7, well, it's the episode 222 high-speed route is Project 7. Project 8, the new connection between Tiverton and Barnstaple. How it looks, not 100% sure, but if you've diverted the main line via Tiverton, suddenly it starts making a lot of sense to rethink how you connect North Devon to the mainline railway network. Projects, 8, 9, or 9 and 10, is down to Bideford and up to Ilfracombe. So there's your list of 10 brackets, 9 close brackets projects in Devon and Cornwall to make the railway network work. And one of the things oh no, that's some green screen. That's half my face up. One of the things that that I've talked about, there are bits of existing railway line that you can absolutely make use of. But as I always say to anyone who's new to this, that's not the default. Don't just highlight that as your route. Start with a straight line and see where you can make use of former railway and see where you might think about doing something new and different, following, for example, new dual carriageways that exist, mapping on to new forms, the new lines of development, new industrial development where it's happened, things like that. But there are a lot of exciting and interesting opportunities, and I think there's more to explore in there, very much so. I think, a bit of news. And the first bit, tell you what, I'll take that, James, for your benefit, I'll take that slightly neater so that you've got the nice clipping start bit for our little segment that we'll strip out. Ticket time, ticket fares, ticket apps, ticket offices, all things tickets. It's some news. So this is from Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Liverpool City Region. This is some good news, which is tap and go, some actual contactless tap and go London style fare usage. This is the right thing to do for a urban railway system, an urban transport system. Sorry, forget railways. Urban transport system, bus, tram, the definitely not a tram buses. Normal buses, Merseyrail, all that good stuff. Tap and go, brilliant. Led by devolved authorities. On a national level, though, do we... I'm nervous about. I'm not necessarily saying this is an ultimately bad thing. This is Heidi Alexander, by the way, saying we're bringing train fares and ticketing in the 21st century. So, they're trialing some digital ticketing across the East Midlands. Okay, not necessarily a bad thing. I'd rather this wasn't being done. Okay, right. Whether it's devolved or national, GBR, that's a whole extra story. What is important is this being used as a way to justify closing more ticket offices? That's where we have to be really sharp on paying attention to what this is talking about, because there already have been some changes to Transpennine Express's ticket office provision of accessible, the ability to book accessibility services, train assistance, which looks suspiciously like getting rid of a thing that was a justification for keeping the ticket offices, and then saying, well, look, fewer disabled people are using ticket offices, so we might as well close them. It's like, yeah, but that's because you've changed the system that means that people can't do the thing in the ticket office anymore, either deliberately or by incompetence. So yeah, be very wary of this, but make no mistake, just because we've got a different government, they are still extremely keen to close a whole bunch of ticket offices. Another one on fares is, we've got ticket apps. Well, ticket prices, of course, are rocketing upwards once again. This always comes up as a story, is that they're increasing by way more than RPI or whatever it is. They're fairly appropriate measure of how much stuff costs more a year, inflation, etc. This happens every year, and there's always a big hoo-ha. Unfortunately, we can get away with doing this because we've built no extra capacity into our railway system, relatively speaking. Marginal, but nothing major. You can just do this because people still travel. We still have massive rail passenger growth. So you can just do this. If you have a government that has no vision and no actual passion for rail, which this one certainly doesn't, then you can just do this. And it doesn't matter the fact that, we look at, put this graph up and you look at the cost of bus and coach, the cost of rail rocketing upwards. This is only to 2015. I couldn't find a newer graph, but it's only got worse. Rocketing upwards since the fuel duty freeze. Meanwhile, the cost of driving has dropped substantially, and it's dropping down towards like 2000s levels. Absolutely baffling. So yeah, you can just do that if you're a government that doesn't have a vision for transport. You can just be doing things like that. Sticking with fares, there is an interesting bit of news going on, which is north of the border. Scotland has scrapped peak fares. They're saying for good, and we'll damn well hold them to it, but that is exciting. We've got rid of peak fares, as has been pointed out by some. Also, super off-peak fares have gone. My view is that's fine. Just getting rid of that distinction gets rid of a whole load of words in your sentence of what your ticket is. You just have the ticket. That's good. It will mean that things get a little bit more expensive in some instances if you've lost a super off-peak, but you are gaining you're gaining a huge amount of affordability by getting rid of peak fares. This is a good thing. And people are arguing, well, it just benefits a load of already well-off Glasgow-Edinburgh commuters. Yes and no. On the face of it, potentially yes. But as soon as you dig deeper, what that means is a large number of people are not driving, which spins out, gives you more free roads for people who have no choice but to drive. It does wind the pool of people who can make the choice to travel by rail. I don't buy into the idea that this is long-term regressive. I think it's a good thing to make railways more affordable. And for some of the people, the academics in Scotland who are perhaps saying, well, the railways already cost too much to Scottish taxpayers, and this is just another way to increase those costs, do better sums. You need to be looking much more closely at value and what railways give the country overall, rather than just going, well, it's this line on the balance sheet and boo, that's bad. No, grow up. However, I'm going to, the last little sneaky little thing I want to, well, I suppose this is good news, but only after criticism. You might remember we talked about AI being used to create announcements on ScotRail trains. They're gone. They've been binned. Serious criticism and the AI announcements have gone, and a human is back. So, too right. Very, very glad to see that. Now, a little bit of extra that, James, you don't have to include in that last bit when we snip it out. A little bit of extra Scotland news. We're going to hang around in Edinburgh because tram expansion is back on the menu. A consultation has been launched for the new Edinburgh Trams line, which is very exciting. And for the bonus episode tonight, by the way, we are going to be going through the consultation to talk about those lines and see what we think. So that is going to be fun. New tram lines for Eddie. Some interesting transport news that is not directly rail related is that Sustrans, the charity, yes, bloody charity and trust, that is in charge of a lot of very important strategic infrastructure and local and regional infrastructure that moves bicycles, wheels, walking, people like that around, is changing its name to the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust, which is definitely a less catchy name. But okay, I don't really. Yeah, look, let's put it this way. I'm sure there's a good reason for changing the name. Sustrans was always ambiguous, but equally, Walk, Wheel, Cycle, Trust is a bit of a mouthful. I'm not convinced by it. The point here is that the fact that we still have strategic infrastructure being managed by a charity is a joke. Government not taking active travel seriously. This is just the idea that you have a massive, complex, strategic network of infrastructure that isn't, for cyclists and wheelchairs and cargo bikes and all sorts across our, not just the urban connectivity, but the regional connectivity that provides. There are loads of examples where including in York, the Lincoln cycle route that I use to get into town carries more people on it at peak time than the whole road does. The number of people moving along it, whether walking or cycling, is enormous. Canal and River Trust is another very good example. It should have continued to be British Waterways. Well, it'd be quite good if we had British, greenways or British travel. But whatever it ends up, however it should be, whether it's totally devolved, whether you retain it as strategic, I don't know. But it being run by a charity that is desperately always hunting for funding rather than being firmly funded for a long time periods is not taking transport seriously, let alone climate change, let alone anything. It's just fundamentally, it's not taking people's mobility seriously. And it's not all bad news. There's just a release in the start of July about this sort of England's mayors gather to pledge a national network. But it's like, but we already have a national network. What's this actually saying? And what's the real commitment behind this? So I remain unconvinced. And ultimately what this, there's an episode in the next bit that I'm going to talk about really, but ultimately what this heads down to, the final thing I want to talk about is the structure of the DFT is just all wrong. This is very small but on one side you've got a whole section dedicated, you have rail services group, rail reform services group, big old section. You've got a tiny little group that's public transport and local group. You've got another section that's major rail projects group. You've got the road transport group. It's all about outputs. It's all about, well, is it rail? Is it road? Is it aviation? Which is just wrong. It just isn't correct. Like, we should be structuring the DFT around the types of mobility. So whether it's urban or rural, whether it's long distance or whether it's short distance, whether it's goods, whether it's people, that's how we should be structuring the DFT. The DFT should not be structured in this, well, I'm a rail person and I'm a road person nonsense. It just doesn't, it's just not fit for purpose. It makes very little sense. And frankly, the sooner we tear up the DFT structure, it doesn't mean that we get rid of all the experts that know what they're doing. It doesn't mean I say, get rid of Alex Hines. It's someone who's very good, and I'm glad he's in post. It doesn't mean we get rid of Alex. It just means that those people, Alex, for example, would move into the rail organisation that does the rail stuff, but the DFT structure within the DFT would be, well, the long distance movement people will end up talking to Alex or whoever it might be, and the short distance people might, but they'll think about the mobility and different ways that it's facilitated, but based around the mobility, not what the bloody, whether it's a track or a road or whatever. That's a key thing that DFT needs to reform. And I have to say, all of this stuff about Sustrans changing names, it feels like deck chairs. The government still not taking active travel seriously. Oh, and there we go. That's if I recorded that a bit weirdly, it's because those bits get snipped out. We'll try and snip those out because they're little snippets that people can enjoy as separate, non-entire chaotic rail natter episodes themselves. The usual sort of outro stuff, really. The last plug for next week, Wednesday, 10th September, I'll talk to you all about the future of the railways, a presentation I need to put together. Beyond 2025, this should be fun. I think I've got an idea of what I'm going to structure it around, and it's going to be some fun talking points. It's going to be kind of totally different to the past one. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. So yeah, come along. It's basically going to be another live rail natter, just like the other one was. It's in Darlington. It'll be at 2 p.m. So it's during the day, Wednesday, 10th September. I think it's 2 p.m. You can find it on the link there. Go and do that. And next week, in theory, is a guest episode. Who that guest is going to be, because there's like 6 guests that I've got lined up, and I don't know who's going to be the person who I end up recording with first. But yeah, quite a few interesting little episodes lined up. The other thing I just wanted to say is I'm going to be on the Green New Deal podcast. I'm recording it tomorrow night, so that should be fun. And go subscribe to Zach's new podcast and tell him that he needs to get me on. I'm going to be going on it. But tell him he needs to get me on, because that'd be fun. Yeah. Anyway, right. It's enough from me. Any little queries? Next week's Natter will be a pre-record. No, because it's during the day. So the next week's Natter, I think, won't be a pre-record. It'll be, it'll be another live one. Or it might be a pre-record with a guest. It might be a live one. I still don't know yet. Will I be at GPW conference? Not planning on it because of time management, and I'm just swamped with a million things at the moment. I was hoping to, but giving the Sustrans a bad name is good news. It means it can be absorbed by Active Travel England. That's what I think should happen, Charlie. At minimum, keeping the existing structure, you absorb it into Active Travel England. I absolutely agree with that, Charlie, yeah. Currency episode, of course. Yes, it's 2 p.m. Thanks, Tom S. And wheelchairs. Wheeling is a way to sort of refer to wheelchairs, among other things. Not just that, but it's one of the ways to catch it. Anyway, right. Zach Polanski, leader of the Green Party, as elected, radical, eco-socialist, eco-populist. It's exciting. See you later on. Cheerio, everyone. Cheerio. See you for the bonus in 19 minutes. I've not set the episode up. I'm about to. Bye. Cheerio.